Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the TSG Bikecast. I'm your host Steve Tambusoff, and I hope you're all doing well. First of all, sorry for the lack of episodes this past month. Sometimes life just gets in the way of hobbies, and unfortunately I had to hit the pause button for a bit. But we're back now, and with a two-parter I really hope you enjoy. Today I chat with Nick Bowman from Destination Trails. Nick has had a long career in the bike industry, from working with Bicycles South Australia, IMBA Australia, World Trail where I first met him, and now as the owner of his own trail business, Destination Trails. This was the first time I actually used Zoom as well to record a conference, so I tried to also record the video of Nick and myself. I bollicksed up at some point, and for some reason it didn't come out the way I expected, but I'm still going to post the video on YouTube, just so you can check it out, and that is at That Stoked Guy on YouTube. And you can also check out other shenanigans I'm into over that way as well. A lot of people ask me if I was going to do video, and I never really thought about it, to be honest. So I hope you enjoy that if you're into that sort of medium. It will get better. The whole point of this podcast as well was to show my learning journey of starting as a complete noob podcaster and learning as I go. And I'm not just going to try and polish it up and make it look like I'm some sort of professional, because I definitely am not. So I hope you enjoyed this episode that I have named Nick Bowman, Bikes, Growth and Red Tape. Enjoy. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the TSG Bikecast. I'm your host Steve Tambusoff, and this week we have Nick Bowman from Destination Trails in South Australia. How you going, bud?
G'day, thanks for having us.
Yeah, man, you're very welcome, my friend. It's been ages since we've spoken. So what I generally do for the first segment of the show is we go on the way back machine to very, very young Nick. So I know that you're from South Australia. You grew up in South Australia. Were you born in South Australia?
No, I'm actually an immigrant. So I came out from the UK as a very small baby. But yeah, my first memories are of Australia, growing up in the burbs, sort of in what we call the foothills here in Adelaide.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the family are back in the UK. So it's just me, my mum and dad and brother that came to Adelaide. And I mean, Australia's been good to us. I think of myself as Australian, obviously.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure my parents ever fully assimilated. They're still very English.
Oh, really? Man, I never even knew you came from the UK. You couldn't tell just by
talking. Well, nah. It's been a while.
Yeah.
But sometimes the Adelaide accent, is a bit different to the rest of the country. But
like a Queensland accent. Yeah, man. So you grew up in South Australia, and stalking you online, trying to write this episode up, my script. You got to BMX as a youngin in the 80s. What was
yes.
What was the scene like back in the 80s?
Well, yeah. Look, I think I was there when ET first kind of came out, and the whole BMX thing was just starting to happen.
Yeah.
And I actually was thinking about it because I listened to your introductory episode, and it got me thinking about, when did I start riding bikes and stuff? And it's definitely some of my earliest memories.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this like fixed gear, like little probably 16-inch wheel bike thing, single speed. And I used to try and keep up with the big kids. But, growing up in the burbs then, there was still a lot of open space and stuff. So there was dirt jumps down the end of the street, and kids were kind of doing stuff on old dragster bikes and modifying them and calling them skid kids. And,
I remember those bikes.
And then it's only the coolest kids that started rocking up on BMX bikes, And I was just mesmerized from the start, like, wow, what's this thing, And then seeing the plastic tufts and the red tires and red bellies, I think they called them or something. Luckily enough, my parents, for my birthday, I think it was, they got me like a Mongoose copy.
Oh, nice.
And that was the first first sort of proper bike I had. It was like a Roadmaster. I think back in the days when bikes were still made in Australia. So, but yeah, look, hooked ever since, and not wanting to sound like a dinosaur, but it was really normal for us just to disappear for the whole day, and our parents not be worried.
Mm-hmm.
And I was only 6 or 7, and we were mostly just down the street, mucking around on the dirt jumps or building little trails or skidding stuff in. But yeah, so and I guess that's where I got to love the bush too, really, in a way. Hanging out in the trees down by the creek. Sometimes catching tadpoles or just exploring. Doing that kind of stuff. So all of those kind of opportunities, I don't think we really would have had the same opportunity growing up in the UK anyway. So
definitely not, man. I had a very similar childhood myself. We had a lot of bush around where we lived in southeast Queensland, and we're just riding bikes and mucking around in the bush. And you knew when where everyone was, because everyone's bikes would be in someone's front yard. Like you go, oh, that's where everyone is. You just cruise over to their place. So yeah, cool, man. So you also threw your leg over a roadie in the 90s as well, as I've found in the early days of roadie riding. Did you ever race roadies or anything like that? Because this is like in the early days of mountain bike, right? There wasn't really much going on in Australia by that point.
No, look, I think most of my competitive stuff when I was growing up was cricket, and we moved from the burbs to the city in somewhere in the early 80s. And it was definitely more ethnic and a lot more. I mean, it's all kind of trendy, yuppie kind of suburbs these days, but it was probably pretty rough back then. And but yeah, so I got into soccer pretty heavily.
Right.
But yeah, the bike riding and skateboarding was always more, the fun. I kind of didn't really do any BMX racing or road racing. It was just sort of like freedom, I guess.
Yeah.
And that also got me thinking. One thing my parents did do for me that was so special was they used to try to get us over to the snow once a year. So we'd either drive or jump on a coach or whatever. My dad loved snow skiing, but that's where I fell in love with the mountains too. So the bike riding, skateboarding, skiing kind of thing was just about having fun and riding fun lines. I kind of never really had a competitive sort of go on it, but so I got a road bike in the early 90s, and not many friends had them. All my friends were buying mountain bikes, and I had a go on my brother's mountain bike, which was pretty fun, and got pretty hooked pretty quickly. My dad had this big old thing I used to ride around, but I just loved the trails and the stuff that was coming through with the bikes. And I think here in Adelaide too, it's sort of like, there's no snow, there's no surf. Well, it's a long way to the surf when you're a kid. And, the hills are right there. They're pretty much right next to us the whole time. And the gravity's always happening. So it's just natural to get into bikes,
What year roughly do you think you got into mountain bikes?
I think I had a couple of early rides, sort of 91, 92, but I bought my first proper mountain bike in 94. GT Timberline.
Oh, GT, nice.
Triple triangle sort of setup.
Yep. Were they fully rigid?
That was fully rigid, but it was a chrome ollie frame, so it was a steely triple triangle, which was pretty cool.
Nice.
The alloy triple triangle was much more rigid, obviously, but I did, and I guess that's where I sort of started to like steel frames as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah, right on. Man, it's crazy. Like, when you hear like pre sort of 2000 mountain biking, whenever I talk to anybody, it's always this whole interesting history of different bikes and wacky technologies and stuff, man. It's so good to talk about fully rigid bikes again.
Oh man, I think I got quadra 10s on it pretty quickly, which was like a whole 10 mil of travel on elastomers. But I was like the first guy in the gang to sort of have a shock on the front. It was a bit of a big deal, but if you got that thing wrong, it did work really exactly like a pogo stick.
Yeah, right.
Preload it in the wrong direction and it would buck you pretty good.
It's so crazy to think how far we've come in just like 20 years, like 25 years.
Sure.
It's
incredible. Man. I mean, it's my riding has stepped up to a level I never would have thought possible. Just like with the bikes we've got now, I just hit these big sort of not big jumps by standards, but jumps that are big for me, and that the bikes just lap it up. The speeds you're getting them. I don't know. It's just easy now.
Yeah, I just clicked over 40 and built myself a new Commensale Meta 29er Enduro for my 40th. And I've just been riding that the last couple of weeks, and it's just bananas, man. I've never had a 29er before. So it's like, just the rolling is just crazy. It's amazing.
It makes
me feel like I'm 20 riding a bike. Yeah. Not a 40-year-old. So you went to high school in Adelaide as well. How did all that go through school and everything? Did you have a set plan that you wanted for your future? Were you already into all that conservation minded, or did you just party on like I did?
Yeah, man, I was always up for the party, that's for sure. High school was a bit of a disaster for me. All sorts of trouble there. The bike riding kept it real for me. I didn't have any plans. I didn't know what the hell I was going to do with my life, but I went back to year 12 a second time, and that was really good. It was sort of like a more alternative school, and that kind of clicked for me. That worked, so I ended up getting into uni from there, and I just set up for an arts degree. And I mucked around with that for a little while. I bummed out twice, and I was doing stuff like, philosophy and astronomy. And, it was all super interesting, but I never really got very far. And it just sort of felt so abstract. So, I kind of bummed out and just ended up working in hospitality for a while and using all my spare time to ride bikes and hang out and do stuff, and also muck around with guitars a bit. Playing in sort of little bands with friends and stuff, just trying to get some sounds happening. So it wasn't until later on I worked out I could actually get into uni to study to be a park ranger. I thought, holy crap,
because
cool.
you did applied sciences, right? So what sort of science did you focus on?
It's really sort of biodiversity management, really. So it's a land management sort of stuff. So you learn a bit of little bits and pieces on everything. I found the stuff about ecology really super interesting, and also different stuff with genetics and it's pretty basic level stuff. But we're doing genetics just around like how sort of how do you it's a long time ago, but just some of the way the evolutionary process works with different animals and invasive species and all of that sort of stuff, and how to protect the little guys. And we've just got such a unique ecosystem in Australia, and the stuff we've brought in is just nothing was really ready for it, of course. But so just looking at all how that stuff went. But then we did a bit of stuff on legislation around protecting stuff, and so I found it quite interesting across the board. So it made it easy to study. But it's kind of setting you up for a government job, really, when you're in parks or or working as a contractor or a weed contractor, or some people went on to do landscape architecture or project management sort of stuff. But I also did like doing the stuff around mapping and GPS, learning how GPS systems worked. And
that would have been the early days of that sort of stuff.
It was, and look, to see the way that stuff's gone too. I mean,
it's crazy.
I remember seeing the first GPS unit in high school, and that probably would have been early 80s. But there was 8 satellites max. Sometimes you could only see 4 of them. But and it was it's just funny little black and white screens with dots floating around.
And now you got things like what I can't remember the one that we're using at World Trail, but you just download it to your iPhone and it's like super accurate, and it's like Motion X GPS, I think it was called, and it's like free app, and it was bonkers. Like we're using that all the time. So crazy to think that sort of technology's come so far. You also like myself in the 90s, product of the 90s, played a lot of hacky sack as well, mate. I found out while I was stalking you around. It's just like I found it in 2 different articles you've spoken about that. It was very
Yeah, it's
funny.
definitely a good distraction at uni and hanging out with the lads just mucking around. It was funny how you don't see much hacky sack anymore, but it was massive
No.
at that time.
Oh,
It was
absolutely.
everywhere. You see it at festivals. I mean, I remember being at Forest Festival or different and there'd be big hack sessions going on.
Yeah, man, it's crazy. Like I remember in the 80s playing handball and stuff at primary school, and then I was talking to my niece the other day, and then they're playing handball now. She's like 15. It's like, oh wow, it's back.
Come back.
It's done the circle. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So once uni was over and you got your degree, what'd you do? Did you have a plan, or did you go traveling, or what did you do after uni?
Yeah, again, I'm probably a good example of not planning anything. Because yeah, my goal was while I was at uni, to leave Adelaide and go. I was just still in love with Bright from all my snow trips with my parents, and I just wanted to go there. And before I'd started uni for the third time, I had actually gone on a bit of a road trip myself in my old combi, and I'd spent a bit of time in Bright, muck around on my mountain bike.
Mm-hmm.
But my mission was I wanted to move to the mountains after I got my qualifications there. But yeah, I got my girlfriend pregnant, and everything kind of changed pretty quickly. So yeah, it was like start looking for work and rushing around doing lots of job applications to get a job in the park service here in Adelaide or whatever. And that never really kind of worked. So I started landscaping, and I'd always had a bit of a passion for gardening.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, out of uni, I was pretty much into landscaping and just around some of the nicer suburbs here in Adelaide. Got working with a pretty cool crew of good guys, and they looked after me, and yeah, that saw me through for a few years.
Yeah, right on. There you go. Yeah, it's funny. Like once you get a taste of the mountains, it's you just want to spend more and more time, and you'll do pretty much anything to get there until you have kids and your priorities change, I suppose. Yeah, man. But that's life, isn't it? So you started working for Bicycles SA in 2002. How did all that come about?
Yeah, man, and that was like one of those sort of cosmic things, really. I'd been banging on to my mates in the 90s that I wanted to get paid to build trails and stuff. And just, while I was landscaping, I was always keeping an eye on jobs, that I might get a job in the park service and stuff. But a job came up to help develop a mountain bike strategy for South Australia. And that was like 2001, because back then, the state government here had actually declared that Eagle Mountain Bike Park was going to be this new whiz-bang thing. And they even announced it on Triple J.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it was going to be the first bike park in Australia. And that blew us all out here, definitely locally, that was going to go ahead. And Bike SA were kind of involved in managing that. So I was starting to stalk them to find out how I could get involved.
Yeah. Before we go on with that, can you just explain who Bicycles SA are for those who don't know? Just briefly.
Oh, sure. Well, if you're in Queensland, it's Bicycle Queensland, and then I think there's Bicycle New South Wales. Also in Victoria, I think they call themselves the Australian Bicycle Network or something now, but it started out as Bike Vic or something. So it's really like that commuter focused, recreational road riding and mountain bike riding kind of community. Bike SA being a lot smaller than the bigger states, of course, but at that time they were really sort of bridging that gap between the mountain bike clubs and the government, I guess, and stepping into that role about helping to sort of mitigate some of the the problems we were starting to see, I guess, around the Adelaide Hills with the unauthorised building and kids doing mad stuff, and it was starting to get pretty ramped up. So Bike SA stepped in there. So I guess there's a pretty similar setup in WA, I think, with West Cycle, but it was a bit different to the eastern states, how that organisation stepped into mountain bike advocacy, basically.
Yeah.
And started to bridge that gap. So they're still sort of ticking along today, but yeah.
Yeah, they've been going for a long time.
Yeah.
So how'd you like fully get involved with them and score a job with them?
and it did, listening to your first podcast, it sort of reminded me again. I was like, I applied for that first job and I was so nervous. Maybe the other thing, having the degree and all that stuff, my resume was maybe a bit bigger than yours.
Yeah, definitely.
quite a few pages of waffle, But I actually didn't get that job. Right. And I went to a guy called Rod Worthington. And look, to be honest, I was pretty young, pretty green, had a little young family and stuff. Whereas Rod that got the job quite experienced because it's fairly high level strategy development, I guess. But I got to know Rod and I shared all the knowledge that I had about sustainable trail stuff that I dug up on the ancient internet back in the late 90s, stuff from the US Forestry Service. And we were just sort of starting to learn about IMBA over here. And in America and everywhere, places were only just starting to rate trails, in terms of difficulty. And most folks were starting to copy the skiing. So I shared all that with Bikecast and got to know them and just kept a really, even though I didn't get the job, to be honest, I just kept a really positive attitude and just kept popping my head up every now and again and asking how I could help out, just listening to the progress of the whole thing and sending in feedback when they asked for it and stuff like that.
Yeah. That's cool.
And then, it got to the point where they're moving, the strategy was done, it was launched, big poly sort of stuff. And then they started advertising. Well, I'm not sure they even advertised for it, but then they moved into the implementation sort of stage. And I'd rocked up to a meeting and at that point, they kind of headhunted me and asked me to come in for another interview for the implementation phase. And that's where I got to meet the infamous Peter Solly. And look, again, that guy, visionary, sort of maybe the mastermind or, the glue that pulled the whole mountain bike strategy together for SA. But he was the first guy to give me a chance, he saw something in me at that interview and, he gave me a job. I just come off the back of a Christmas party with my landscaping crew, so I was a bit loose.
Rough.
But, at that point, he said, right, let's go to the pub and do this interview at the pub. So we did my interview over a glass of Cooper's Pale Ale. And it took off from there, and I think when he gave me that job, or it got to the point where I was kind of harassing him a bit. When do I start?
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember going home that night and going for a ride on my mountain bike and hanging out in Blair National Park because I lived up that way then, and just couldn't believe my luck. Really, it was overwhelming and just like, oh my God, now I've got it. Now what do I do?
What's next? Yeah, I was the same when I got that job with World Trail. When I got the call from Dylan Jeffries saying, "How soon can you get to Queensland?" I sat on my bed in my room going, "What the hell just happened? Am I about to drive to Queensland in 2 weeks?"
Yeah, and I think about it now. There's not many things more scary or more pressure than actually getting your dream job. Because the person putting the most pressure on you is yourself, in a way. So,
absolutely, man. Yeah. And I think that's one of the biggest barriers to get across when you're trying something totally new. You were young family, you got to be bringing in the bacon as well, and also chasing your dreams. It can be a tough gig, dude. So you were with them for like 6 years or something, right? With Bikecast?
It was a pretty sorted history.
Right.
It was sort of on and off for 6 years. The first 18 months was flat out, and oh man, that was life changing. And again, put myself under so many crazy stories I could tell you, but stuff like I helped organise the first IMBA visit to Adelaide in 2002, and Joey Klein came along then, and I got to meet Joey and those guys blew our minds, man. I mean, they'd already been to talk to Glenn and those guys at Cairns and Townsville, and they'd filtered their way down the East Coast, and they got to Adelaide. They were still going their way over to Perth, but wherever those guys went, it blew everyone's minds, and it just opened the doors up. But also, we shared a lot of knowledge with them, I think, and so that was definitely a big highlight. But I remember one thing. I had this big presentation one day at Bike SA in that first year to do the horse essay and walking essay, and it was all really tough sort of negotiation, consultation sort of stuff, getting access to parks, that sort of thing. And I had a ticket to go see Tool the night before, and I just couldn't let my hair down. I went to the Tool concert and couldn't relax because I was so stressed out about this presentation the next day, man. It was just such a weird vibe. It's like Tool, and it was like,
yeah, no, stressed to the point you can't enjoy Tool.
So, but I was probably one of the most sober people in the audience that night, and that's always an interesting perspective as well.
Yeah,
I think at one point Maynard looked off the stage and wasn't even on stage, and nobody even noticed. Like,
oh God, Tool. Don't think much has changed now to anyone who goes sees Tool these days.
The visuals were incredible.
Oh, they're amazing. I've seen them a couple of times over the years. Yeah, pretty awesome. So what other roles did you take on with Bicycle SA? Like, it's obviously a pretty varied job.
Oh yeah, and look, I learned a lot. So that first 18 months was mountain bike project officer, and so I was doing and my main project was sort of helping to formalise the trails at Fox Creek. I was helping out a little bit with Eagle Mountain Bike Park. There's a couple of other guys working on that. Joe Corby, who's racing down in Hobart these days, he lives down there, and they're a pretty fast cross country rider. And Marty Krieg, he's working for Parks up in Alice Springs now. So they were getting Eagle going, so I was helping them out on a few things there. That's the other funny thing about Eagle. Well, it was declared the first bike park. It didn't open until 2006, and by that stage, Stromlo opened. So Stromlo got the ticket as the first bike park. It was just like, damn. But but things happened in that first 18 months. There was a lot of money spent on different things, and actually the state government spent about $6 million on trail stuff across the board, but it included walking and horse trails as well. And it was pretty intense time, and it sort of got to the point where the money was starting to run out at Bike SA, and I was asked to reapply for the job. There was another guy there with a mortgage, and Marty, and there was stuff going on. I'd just been going through sort of a divorce with the mother of my first child kind of thing, and that was all blowing up, and I just sort of thought, look, I'll step out, let those guys run it for a while. There wasn't enough budget for the three of us, and I thought I'd start looking at some other things, and everyone thought I was crazy, but it just at the time I thought I had to just change stuff up a little bit, and I wanted to be on the trails again. It was sort of becoming more about admin, and they were asking me to do bike ed stuff and train, to help cover the budget and stuff, train primary school kids how to ride bikes and stuff. And it was a beautiful job, but I just haven't got the right temperament to train kids in traffic. You have to be a certain kind of person to deal with those kind of moments, I think, without swearing to get off. So it was weird. I pulled the pin and decided to go traveling for a little bit, but one thing led to another, and Marty Krieg and Bike SA was starting a project at Eagle with the Green Corps team to start some of the first trails, and I guess this was like late 2003. And I sort of put my hand up to help run that team, and again they thought, no, this other guy would be better for that, but then they started this other program and actually wanted me to go work on some trails at Fox, like with these young kids, these kids that were looking for work and needed some skill development and stuff. So I sort of started getting into the youth development side of things.
It's really cool.
But more around trails and using the trail building as a way to get kids outdoors, being active, but also getting some skills, like basic certificates to get into the workforce, and look, that led a whole other chapter. So I spent probably 12 months doing that in the Adelaide Hills with, that was a youth conservation corps it was called. So I had about 8 different teams within that 12 months, but got to meet all sorts of different kids, all sorts of different challenges. Some of it was around tree planting and stuff, not all trails, but
yeah, that's really cool though, youth development, especially with kids who don't really know what they want to do, and being able to go out there in nature and do some cool stuff is like, Did you find it helped a lot of those kids? Did they take it all on board?
Man, some of those programs are pretty tough. you know, I think the program I was running, if I remember correctly, they were sort of on New Start. So they were getting a little top up to come along to this training. So some, you know, yeah. So about that. So what happened? You know, you might start with 10 kids on the first day, but you know, within a few weeks, you're sort of whittling down to 4 or 5 really good ones that wanted to be there. You know, or you know, some of the other ones had other problems going on that made it hard to rock up at the same place every day. But yeah, it only really worked for the kids that wanted to be there. And so I met some pretty special, you know, I mean, pretty awesome people that were trying to change their lives, get out of their bad situations, you know, get some qualifications and go ahead. I mean, that was the first time I encountered sort of people that were sort of coming, you know, effectively third generation welfare. And they're trying to change their lives, and all of their family and friends are telling them, what are you going to work for? What are you doing that for? You know, so they were fighting their own sort of home culture, I suppose, to do something for themselves. So, you know, it was awesome to sort of help those guys get ahead, you know, and about themselves, you know. Saw some people grow up in that time they were there. But I think the big one was I got the Green Corps job at Melrose. So that was sort of you know, my 12 months into it, they sent me up to Melrose to run a team up there, and that was sort of like next level stuff because you're all living away for 6 months as a team in a small town. And that we built some of the first Black Diamond trails in Melrose.
And Melrose is still like a really functioning mountain bike town now. It has a bike shop that's still cracking along, and some of the local industry there is still supported mostly by bikers, which is really rad. And then they have what's their festival? Is it Fat Tire Festival, whatever they have down there as well?
Yeah, man. Yeah, so it's really and again, some of that stuff came out of that first mountain bike strategy, but I felt very blessed to be part of those beginnings. And it's so good to see Melrose just, you know, going from strength to strength. You know, it's a pretty humble sort of place, but it's got a really cool vibe, and it's really definitely worth a detour if you're on the highway, you know, going east-west kind of thing. But yeah, and it's the terrain, the Flinders Range is just so different to most of the rest of Australia. Alice Springs can be like it a bit, but where Melrose is, you got the mountains and the rocks, but the rocks aren't super sharp. So yeah, you can do some pretty fun stuff, and there's some really nice loamy soils down the bottom of the hill, you know. Yeah, I'm really, you know, proud of what the Over the Edge guys have done there, you know, just kept it ticking along. And there's a lot of different people that have helped out over a long period of time to keep that place what it is. And it kind of kicked off about the same time as Forest in Victoria, you know.
Mariners Trails.
And I think Melrose is hopefully going through a new renaissance because there's you know, they're spending a bit of money in town. I just lost the gig to do the next 20 Ks worth of trail just north of town there.
Okay.
And Trailscapes picked me for that one, you buggers.
Gary.
Yeah, they're up there at the moment, and some of the locals are working for them, which is good to hear. Yeah, those guys are really fun to hang out with, and so it'll be interesting to go ride the next stage of stuff up there.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's expanding.
Yeah,
that's awesome, man. So after you finished up with Bikes SA and everything else you were doing in between then, you got involved with Mitcham Shire. How did that all come about? What were you doing for those guys?
Through that Bike SA process, flowing on from Fox Creek, one of my jobs was talking to Mitcham Council and Mitcham Shire, or they call it City of Mitcham now. And it's funny because that's one of the key things about Adelaide. You could buy a day pass for the train and jump on the train, and the train would take you to the top of the hill. And then there was about 10 different single track runs down from the top of Belair. So it was like a great day out. But
that's awesome.
It was kind of just chaos all over their parks and little conservation areas and stuff. So I was doing that in the late 90s, and it was still going on. It's still going on today, but Mitchell were just trying to manage all that stuff. Bikecast were trying to help them, and I got to know them through that process. And then I did the Greening Australia stuff, Green Corps kind of programs, and Mitchum in that time were developing their own strategy. And it just so happened to be Rod Worthington again, the guy that done the strategy for the state. But so I was keeping in touch with him, and he moved out of that strategy sort of realm, and it started moving again into that implementation phase. And they asked me to come into an interview there as well, or they advertised the job. So that was to be the trails officer implementing their mountain bike strategy. So I kind of, rolled into that one. And was lucky enough to get that job. And that was an interesting process for sure. And I guess, look, uni did help me to get better at my paperwork stuff, but it's not necessarily my strong point.
Yeah.
So being involved there at local government was, it was a bit of a learning curve for me.
Yeah.
And certainly the bureaucratic processes were.
Oh, absolutely. I bet you'll learn a lot as well having to go through that sort of red tapey sort of business.
Oh, yeah, man. I wanted to call the first trail red tape.
There you go. Makes sense. So obviously you were helping that development side, trying to calm down all the rebels out there riding around the area. And
it was kind of, it had settled down a bit by then. Like Mitchum had actually asked the trains were changing. That in the 90s they had a special carriage with no seats, and they just loaded up with bikes. It was hilarious.
Oh, that's awesome.
But yes,
it's just crazy to think that. Yeah,
I know. Like, oh man, I'd love to do it again. But all the trains are electrified now. It's all quite different. And
it's just it's quite a funny concept, you look in Northern Hemisphere and you got Europe and stuff, and they're all got gondolas and stuff, and then in Australia there's some dudes on a train. It's how we get up there.
For sure. So it kind of gone a bit underground by the time I was working at council. But the thing that was happening then is the forums, the mountain bike forums, and there was about 3 forums in Adelaide: the cross country, the downhill, and I guess people were doing pink bike or something else at that time as well. But quite a lot of my management of people was with those mountain bike forums, just trying to get information out, telling them what we're doing, trying to discourage people from building illegal tracks or digging up stuff. And then I was sort of flagging stuff out for the council, trying to find the alignments and that sort of thing. And then developing the plans, and then helping with that public consultation process. And that was a big wake up call, dealing with the the really hardcore residents who don't want anyone in their park that's next to their back fence,
and that's still a big problem with a lot of trail advocacy in this country and probably around the world as well. As local residents, we still have issues out here with it all the time, so I understand.
I know. And later on down the track, I thought if we could make it work in the Adelaide Hills, you should theoretically be able to make it work anywhere in Australia. But just, I don't know. I think in some places it would have been easier 20 years ago. It's just getting harder and harder all the time,
Absolutely.
If you haven't got access.
You look at what's going on in Warburton at the moment, with their environmental effects study, and it's just been a massive headache for that crew. And I think it's the Yarra Council. They've been out doing their own study of all the bike parks around Victoria and stuff. And I met some of the crew up at Falls towards the end of the season, and I had a chat to them, and they just said it's tiring work, but we're just doing it. It's not just for us; it's for everybody. So,
man. And look, I like to say a little prayer for those guys every now and again, and all those fronts, because I know I've been there and I know how brutal it is, and you kind of sometimes you're getting beaten up by riders as well, because you're not getting the cool stuff that they want. And then you go riding with your mates, and all they want to talk about is what you've been doing all week at work. and and it's everywhere you go. You go to the pub, you go to a gig. Everyone wants to find out. It's just like, oh man, can't I just have a break from?
A break from my hobby job that I love. Give me a break. I know, right?
The politics of it, anyway.
Absolutely.
and some of my mentors at IMBA, you know, that's why they've got stand-up paddle boards and kayaks, you know, because or a surfboard, because they can just, you know, you can zone out of it a little bit. And it's taken a lot of practice for me actually when I'm riding my bike I turn my trail brain off and I put my riding brain on. And so I'm not looking at drainage or I'm not looking at stuff. It's just like, no, I'm just here to have fun. And I'll just switch into that mode, you know, and just enjoy it, you know. And I actually really enjoy riding trails other people have built, you know, and seeing what they've done, you know. It's kind of interesting.
Oh, absolutely. You can never turn trail brain off, but you try best to. It's always still just bringing information in just on the sly. Yeah, I totally get that.
When I go back to Derby, man, that place is just like, it's really easy to have fun there, you know. And it's funny to see how things have settled in since you know, you were there in the early days and I had a bit of a go-to, and the trail is what the life of a trail is so interesting to watch, you know, as it evolves over those years and seasons, you know. And
absolutely,
like Atlas now just seems so much more burly than when I was down there, you know. And it's kind of cool, and it's such an adventure. But when I'm in Derby, it's just fun, man. You know, it's just like woohoo, and you just get caught up on the vibe. And I guess that's the same whenever you go to a trail town, you know, like Queenstown in New Zealand.
Yeah, absolutely. Roto as well, another big one, you know. You just has that whole it's got everything in one little package, and you always feel like everything's just every bit of fun around every corner, pretty much.
Sure.
Yeah. So when you finished up with Mitcham, you joined IMBA Australia. So like IMBA's a pretty huge organization. Joey Klein, of course. Is he still involved with IMBA these days?
Yeah, man, he's like the oldest serving staff member. He's been there since it must be 94, 95, somewhere around there.
Because I met him 2015, maybe when we opened the Epic Trail at Buller. He was over.
Yeah,
that's when I met him.
Right.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, so can you just explain what IMBA is to the uninitiated who don't actually know, because it's a pretty important part of all mountain biking around the world?
Oh, that question. Damn it.
It was going to be asked. Just briefly, if you want.
Well, I mean, I got to know them at that Bikecast period, and they didn't even have that Trail Solutions book yet, but there was another one they were using called Building Better Trails, a guide, and they really only looked at cross country stuff. And they weren't even starting to rate trails as such, but it sort of they were sort of, you know, giving us a blueprint, like a technical drawing on how to build, you know, environmentally friendly trails. And then when Joey, and it made sense to me, you know, being a landscaper, being mad keen on trails and bikes and stuff, because, you know, I'd also done a lot of bushwalking with my parents when I was growing up too. And it all kind of clicked for me. And so I became what you might describe as, you know, a disciple or an imbecile. But yeah, and then Joey came out and they did this presentation, man, and it blew our minds. And the pictures they were showing us of the stuff in Wales where they were using rock to make hardened surfaces and building, you know, or whether it was timber structures and the way they were dealing with these, you know, problems and talking about flow. So they sort of gave us a blueprint to start talking to Australian land managers. And then when Trail Solutions came out in 2004 and they had the ratings and, you know, the really pretty pictures that, you know, landscape architects or town planners could actually sort of understand, it was like this sort of template to start things happening. And it just opened up so many doors, you know, but also their professionalism and the way they, you know, presented themselves and, you know, didn't get too caught up emotionally. It was all that, always professional when they were talking to land managers or to the riders, you know. And so Tony Scott from MTBA, you know, he's a pretty visionary guy as well. One of the founding members of MTBA, I should say, or the Australian Mountain Bike Association back then. But he knew how important IMBA were, and I'd caught up with him by chance at different conferences and stuff over the years. And And while I was still at Mitcham, I actually forked out the cash, or borrowed the money rather, to go to the IMBA Summit in Utah, which was at Park City. And I thought it'd be good for my personal development, you know, and it was all technically tax deductible. So I could talk about that trip. I ended up getting a round the world ticket, catching up with some family quickly in London. I think I did 4 days in London, 4 days in Fruita, 4 days in Utah, and then 1 day in LA and back home.
Whirlwind round the
Ended
world
up being
trip.
pretty crazy, but
Yeah.
I got to hang out with Troy and Fruita, who I'd already met, and then he got me a ride. He just hooked me up with just sort of bummed a ride with these guys going to the conference, and we drove from Fruita to Park City. And that was cool as well. That worked out. But yeah, then I got to the conference, and it was like, you know, sort of 300, 400 people that are as mad keen as you and I about trails all together for a party. You know,
Yeah.
like, and and it started with, you know, them doing backflips into the pool where they, you know, had the skiing training and stuff. And I think what was the Australian aerial skier, Jackie somebody, but she was already there. She was there doing displays for us and stuff. Well, and IMBA, not being a racing organization, they had a beer sponsor. So
makes sense.
Fat Tire were their sponsor. Cool beer. And that's, you know, when the whole craft beer thing was starting to take off as well, 2008, I suppose. So, you know, again, this just confirmed everything for me. But and I'd already got to know Glenn a couple times, and Glenn was there as well. He was a keynote speaker, man, and
yeah, right.
He just blew the socks off the whole crowd, you know. But he read out the whole of Mulga Bill, Banjo Patterson's poem, to the whole floor of 300 Americans, man.
That's the way to get them into the palm of your hand.
But as an Aussie in the audience, I was just like, woohoo! Yeah. The first recorded downhiller in the world.
Yeah. So that's like, that would have been like the real early days of like World Trail incepting anything, isn't it? Like it'd be because it's around that time, wasn't it?
Just off the back of Stromlo, and that was a huge success.
Yeah.
But you know, Glenn was a force unto himself then anyway.
Absolutely, on the world stage, for sure.
And everyone in the world knew him still before World Trail.
Yeah.
But, he invited, you know, he being the friendly guy that he is, he just said, "Oh, come along, Nick, come into this meeting. So, you know, come and have dinner with us." And I ended up sitting down around the table with like all the best trail builders in the world, and I'm just like, what? Holy hell, how did I get here? You know, like it was
awesome.
You know, I'm just this Mitcham Council Trails officer guy, but at the time, and but Daffer Davis was there, you know, the guru who started all the stuff in Wales or the UK back in the early days. And there's another guy from South Africa, Boother, and I think his company's called Dirt Utopia or Dirtopia or something, but he's a big trail builder in South Africa.
Okay.
There's this other guy from Czech Republic, and I got to meet this other guy, Rick, who'd worked for IMBA, but he was a Kiwi working down sort of Hamilton, Rotorua sort of area. And then I got dragged along to a Professional Trail Builders Association meeting, and Tony Boone was there, although I didn't get to meet him that time, but he was there, and Joey Klein and those guys. And that was bizarre, man, just sitting in on that meeting and with the American trail builders. And it's 2008, and you know, I wouldn't call it was a budding industry, you know.
Yeah.
So kind of the people in that room were all the virtual pioneers of professional trail building, like literally in that one room. And it was so casual. They were just saying, "Oh yeah, how do you get on into the group? You know, just make sure you buy the right person, the right case of beer." And
same thing applies today.
But that was mind-boggling to witness, you know. And I sort of did catch up with Tony Scott and Gillian Duncan, who was the president back then, and she's still involved with Gap Creek Trails, I think. But she was a lovely person to work with as well. But yeah, they were talking about starting IMBA in Australia. So I sort of put my hand up and had to apply for the job, of course, and all that sort of stuff. And funny again, I didn't get it. I didn't get the job the first time. And it was like, a bit of a kick in the teeth, got to pull my socks up a little bit or whatever. Actually, they gave it to Dapper Davis the first time round.
Okay.
He was going to move out from Wales to do the job. But for personal reasons, it didn't work out for him. And so I sort of got in on the second round. But
it was, win's a win.
Yeah. So, and look, they didn't want me to leave at Mitcham, but and they were really good to me, by the way. They looked after me and we did a lot of amazing stuff. And the guys I worked with there, like, Cam Opie, who was the sort of the leader of the community services department there. I mean, he loved the outdoors. He loves young people, loves that outdoor recreation stuff. He couldn't see any reason why we weren't allowed to use the open spaces. So he fought like a champion for us, There's a lot of people like that. Andrew Quaiser, was a mentor to me there as well. And, but yeah, it was time for me to go. And it wasn't really the right place for me. Being in the bureaucracy, I was constantly frustrated with the processes. So, yeah. And then, so MTBA, IMBA Australia, they just started sending me out all over Australia to spread the word, basically. And it just went mental, man. I mean, sort of joke about it at the time. I was like, oh, yeah, I'm the only one crazy enough to even think about doing this job because...
Yeah, well, it's and like we were talking about earlier, you're going to have citizens, you're going to have local governments and people that are always going to be naysayers or against bike development. And no doubt you came up against the same brick wall every place you went to, right? Like if you're trying to advocate for
pretty much, yeah. It was like the exact same thing, but no one would accept that, would work locally or, and it's like, it's kind of like battling the Matrix, like you might take out, a few agents in one corner, but there's a million more standing over there.
Yeah, exactly.
As a metaphor, but I guess that was frustrating in a way because it's like, here we are, we've got evidence. And it was even the same when we started building trails here in Adelaide. It's like, oh, the IMBA standards work in America, but they won't work with our Australian soils. And it's like, we literally, Forestry SA backed us there and we built the first IMBA spec trails in Adelaide on forestry country and later on Eagle. But, and at that point, it's like, see, we can build sustainable trails in Australia. Yep. We had to prove it. No one would believe us on our word. It was, and then it was the same at the national level. Like even though Perth had stuff happening and there was runs on the board at Listerfield, there was runs on the board at Gap Creek, Brisbane City Council. That was, and props to Gillian, but also Oppie up there. He was one of the guys that made it happen in those days, and you just couldn't replicate it anywhere. The weird stuff would happen, like you get a good ranger like Mark Urquhart at Yuyangs.
Yeah. And
he'd do amazing stuff, and that's why Yuyangs is still so good today.
Oh, man, it's so popular.
Yeah, and I mean, Mark was a key as a district ranger. I'm not sure it would have worked out like that if he wasn't in that role, but at some point then, the system, they moved them to another area and you kind of lose that whole sort of momentum and also the relationships you've built up with the land managers. You have to start all over again, and that, through my career, for the same place, you might deal with 10 different people on the same patch of land, because it's constant rotation of staff and people moving around and stuff. So, it's weird, but the trail builders sometimes know the parks better than the park staff.
Yeah. Spend so much time out there.
I don't like to say that, and I don't want to rub it in anyone's face, but it does sort of naturally happen sometimes that way because and that's one of the reasons that I got to do cool stuff at Fox Creek here, which is still my local, is that I built that relationship with the, sort of that professional relationship with the previous management, and there was that trust, and times have changed, but they trusted what I was doing or what IMBA Australia was doing. So it was a really good you got a lot of stuff done without, too much sort of hoo-ha. But
yeah. Now it all just seems like hoo-ha at the moment these days, doesn't it?
And I understand you got to have transparent, contracts and everything, all of that stuff, and more, committee decisions and keep everyone involved. And I totally agree with that. And everything's got to move on and go forward on that sort of realm. But it is really sad when you see some, that change of sort of, well, I don't know. It's harder in the big government agencies to keep those, personable sort of relationships going on.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You're dealing with so many people in so many sectors, and you got to try and keep them all happy. And it's always going to be a tough gig. So with IMBA Australia, the cycling in parks policy, was that a part of what you were traveling around doing? I just sort of read something about that.
Yeah. Look, that was probably like, I guess, the culmination of all the advocacy we were doing. I mean, I was also working pretty closely with a lot of councils as well, and mountain bike clubs, like trying to support the local grassroots clubs with their advocacy, with their councils or whatever. But yeah, just at that time, it was all coming to a head in Sydney. It was also just sort of almost being finalised in Adelaide, and South Australia. Bikecast had been working on that stuff, and there was a pretty good sort of reference group committee working on that in Adelaide, but they brought me in as IMBA Australia, so I was sort of at the tail end of some of that stuff there too.
Yep.
But yeah, I was just in that hot seat, I guess, really, to be the rep, nationally for that, for organised mountain bikers to have a voice in those processes, and yeah, reviewing the documents and all that stuff and making sure it worked, and just being that voice of IMBA, because that's the other thing. Like, all the land managers loved IMBA and they loved their model and they wanted to go down that path.
Yep.
So it made it easy for them to talk to me as well on that front, rather than a racing club. It's sort of, if you've got a racing club, it made it a bit harder for them to talk directly sometimes. But yeah, so I was there when, really most of the states started that process and finished it too. So, and, there was some pretty dark days there, like, or long nights, and that was the other thing, working in that role. I was mostly working with volunteer advocates in states as well. So, I'd be catching up with people, especially if I was talking to WA, it could be 9 p.m. here in SA, and they're just sort of knocking off work over there. So I ended up working some pretty long days just to keep stuff bubbling along. But some of it was, I got to meet so many awesome people, really, that were involved in that process. And my vision for IMBA at that stage would have been if we could have, like, had a rep in every state, to do that day-to-day work, instead of flying someone in and out, or coughing up heaps of money to get people and, staying in hotels and hiring cars and all that stuff.
Yeah.
If you just had someone in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, just to be there, front up every day for those meetings, and put out those little fires as they popped up, it would have, stuff would have moved a lot quicker. But you have to make money to do all that stuff. So.
Oh, that's it. That's it.
But yeah, there's a number of complications about all that process. But I think the cycling in parks policy stuff, that's something I kind of hang my hat on a little bit, just because it's it's a sort of bite-sized chunk of what I was doing, and it has enabled a lot of other stuff. So and I think there is a bit of a hole there now that we don't have an IMBA in Australia, I think, but everything got to a point where it moved pretty quick, and stuff happened. So it's probably not as important now as it was back then. But
yeah, it's true. So it folded into MTBA, right? I couldn't really find much info about why IMBA stopped in Australia, and it's hard. It's all a bit blurry. I looked through some forums and stuff trying to find some clear answers, and I really couldn't find much. So, do you have any clear answers for us all?
Yeah. Look, and I was there, and I guess my perspective is pretty detailed. But MTBA kind of built the money and to get a staff person over a lot of years. It was coming out of everyone's membership. all around Australia for a long time. They called it the Trail Fund. And, you know, Tony Scott and the MTBA committee had been screwed away kind of into, you know, a bucket of cash to do something about, you know, to fund advocacy in the long run. And so they kind of owned it at the start. And I was technically an employee of MTBA.
Oh, okay.
And so they were running that program. And I guess, you know, no regrets and stuff, but, you know, it was always going to be a challenge to have recreational and advocacy in together with racing. You know, it was, so I was sort of kept quite autonomous, as a sort of not really a free agent, but, you know, working on totally separate programs. I had to report to the board and all that stuff. So they pretty much owned it. I mean, there was a point at the start there where we could have gone our own way and separated from MTBA and then just paid them back the loan, like in a loan sort of setup. You know, we had to pay back those funds. And so I think I was maybe, I don't know, at the time my belief was, no, let's work together. You know, I've always tried to be pretty positive. I'm probably a bit more cynical now than I was back then. But I thought we could make it work, and I thought it'd be a good thing. And I thought Australia, smaller population, smaller community, you know, it'd be better if we all worked together and kept it tight, you know. But yeah, over the course of that 5 years, I like towards the end, to be honest, the board of MTBA, all they really wanted was, you know, to keep the racing happening and getting gold medals and stuff. They're pretty racing focused. I couldn't really get them to understand the benefit of IMBA. I just literally couldn't. And again, maybe the big secret there was the guys in the US said to me at that time, if you want to go your own way, Nick, we'll support you. Not financially, but but in terms of with the brand and stuff, because they saw how it was going. The same sort of stuff was happening in New Zealand, it was happening in the US, it was happening in Canada. You know, this push to amalgamate mountain biking and road cycling and everything together in one big conglomerate. It's finally happened now, as we know. But yeah, man, I guess it was political. They just didn't see the value of having a different brand, and they wanted me to become like the MTBA, you know, trails rep. And I guess there was two big things happening then. I was kind of burning out pretty bad. I had two new kids and a new family. So the timing wasn't great there. Not great planning, Nick Bowman.
Wing it.
But look, I was burned out, man. I mean, I was flying around everywhere constantly, and I put my hand up to the MTBA board. You know, and I don't want to offend anyone here, but I'd said a couple of times, let's get some staff, let's build this. You know, we could do some really good stuff here. And there was money in the budget to put other people on to help me. But the answer was, no, we like what you're doing, just keep doing it. But, you know, I was aging and not riding and not happy and eating too much airplane food. And so I got to that point. It's like, no, I've done my bit. I've got to just pull out for a little bit, just reassess what the hell am I going to do from here. And that was a really tough decision. And
again, you know, it's always hard when you've got a couple of kids again as well. And, you know, you got to think about a future that's going to be sustainable for yourself, right?
Yeah, for sure. And there was certainly some interested people around Australia looking to start a new organisation, but and it could have worked. I just literally didn't have the energy to pull together all those personalities and manage a committee and, you know, go flat out again, 120% for the next 5 years to do it all over again, you know. So, but yeah, and I guess the thing that kept coming back to me was, you know, like the whole reason I got into this whole game in the first place was because I loved being on the trail, you know. And at IMBA there, I was just flying around everywhere and watching everyone else build trails and have fun.
You're a bureaucrat almost, pretty much.
Well, yeah, and I get to do all the, you know, the tough meetings and the paperwork, and then and as I said, which is not my strong point and definitely not my passion.
Mm,
So it's like, I just had that real strong feeling, like get back to your roots, get back to where it belong and where you belong kind of thing, which is out in the bush,
Absolutely,
and
man.
and that's where I started thinking about, putting my hand up for World Trail.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd already learned a little bit about what was going to happen in Derby through IMBA Australia. And it just sounded like such a cool project to me.
We'll leave it at that for this week. I hope this episode brought some insight to the history of trail advocacy in our country and the work that Nick and so many like him have achieved over the last couple of decades. In the next episode, we chat about his time at World Trail, the creation of his own trail business, and his history with the Fox Creek Trail Network from the early days to the present. If you are new to the podcast, subscribing on your respective platforms helps push the show into more people's ears. If you want to say hello, want me to give a shout out to your riding group, shop, or club, you can message me direct on Instagram at thatstokedguy. And this episode will also be on YouTube on my channel, also named That Stoked Guy. So that's a wrap for this week. I love you all and catch you out on the trails.